Accessing library computer data.
Out there are no saints. Just people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Hope you're ready for a deep dive into everyone's favorite race, the Ferengi. We're going to be talking about the Nagus, episode 11 of season 1 of Deep Space Nine. This one was directed by David Livingston. Story goes to David Livingston. Teleplay goes to Ira Stephen Bear. It aired back on March 21st, 1993. In this one, retiring Grand Nagus Zek announces Quark as his successor over his own son. Meanwhile, Sisko frets over his son's devotion to his friend Nog, a known troublemaker. Clay is here to talk about this one. Clay, how are you doing? Feeling particularly capitalist today?
I'm good. This is an interesting episode for me because I'll be honest, up to this point, this show isn't really. You guys aren't really selling the show to me much. But this episode, I don't know. We could talk about. I feel like this one might be more of a calibration episode for me, so we can get into it.
Sure, I think that's it's a good place to start. It's certainly better than Move Along Home. I'll say that to sort of spoil what I think about it, but we're gonna get into it. I'm gonna play an audio clip right now. We'll come back and we'll talk about the Nagus right after this.
And so the Andorian says, "Your brother. I thought it was your wife." Get it? Wife? Had to think about that one, didn't you?
I'm looking for Quark.
You found him.
I'm Krax. And this is my father, Grand Nagus Zek.
Tell me, is the Grand Nagus here on business or pleasure?
Is there a difference?
No, of course not.
What's funny, Clay, is that to get to my innermost fears and everything is that the people who are doing the podcast with me now, not liking early Deep Space Nine enough, where they'll be like, you know what, I'm just done watching the show. I'm not going to continue on. So I feel like I have to be kind of a cheerleader here. Although you've heard, I've been on the Twitter feeds where people say that just wait till such and such an episode comes along. They do get better, but I guess let's talk about how do you feel about the series so far in general terms before we even get into the Nagus. Is there anything you want to say?
Well, I'm willing to cut it some slack because I know that TNG had a similar problem. I think, unfortunately, I don't know. I can't decide if it's a fortunately or unfortunately thing. The fact that I'm watching fewer episodes and it's a show that I'm not as familiar with the characters, I feel like I have a bit more of a learning curve with this one.
Sure.
With this show because, I don't really give a shit about these guys yet. I don't care about Bashir yet. I don't care about Dax yet. I don't care about Kiri. I mean, the fact that I know their names is something, but it hasn't hooked me yet. And this episode in particular, yes, way better than the last one, but still I found it to be fairly unengaging.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if that's because I don't yet care about the hierarchy of the Ferengi, or if I'm not yet sold on the relationship of Sisko and his son, or Jake and Nog.
Yeah.
I'm not. When I said it's a calibration thing, it's like this episode seems like more in line of what they're trying to do on the show, where it's less a plot-driven exploration kind of thing and more of these are the situations that happen inside the walls of Deep Space Nine kind of thing.
Yeah. And let me know, I agree with that. I'd also say that something that this episode does well that sort of distinguishes itself from TNG is that the end of this episode, there's no hint that there's going to be a serialized story off this, right? The story's complete at this point. However, I feel that what happens in this episode will have an impact on other episodes going forward, right? Because they're not leaving the scene of the crime at the end of this episode. Like the Nog thing might not be 100%. Commander Sisko might not look at the Nog thing as a 100% good thing going down the line, but I feel like this episode has to have an impact on how he's going to react in future episodes about it.
Well, the fact that they, it actually surprised me a little bit, the fact that they carried over the Jake and Nog thing from the last episode.
Sure.
Like it seemed like such a throwaway thing in the last episode, which I think to the detriment of the last episode, because it never really came back at all. Like it just sort of is like what happened at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah, it was the first 5 minutes, basically, warming people up for what Move Along Home would eventually become.
But honestly, I mean, I think the fact that it was in there makes it a little bit easier for me to follow what's going on in this one, because it's, I was already introduced to that relationship.
Right.
But yeah, this one was weird because like I felt like it was pretty boring. I thought it was a pretty boring episode. Up until
100% agree that it's a boring episode.
The last maybe 10 minutes or so, where they kind of, the story kind of makes the turn in both the A and the B plot, and my reaction was, okay, that's at least interesting character stuff. Like the fact that his son is tutoring his friend, I thought that was good character stuff. And the twist about the Ferengi leadership at the end, I thought, it was pretty good. Like again, it's sort of like it doesn't really have any bearing on anything, but it's a neat way to tie that story up.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I mean, so the ending kind of redeemed it a little bit for me, and made me a little bit hopeful moving forward. But for the 90% of it, it was another one where I just felt like I was checking my watch.
Yes, and I guess I'll clarify a little bit of what you've said so far. I feel that to this point, the characters haven't earned anybody's affection. So the fact that you're missing episodes doesn't feel to me like when I'm watching this and you're not watching it, I kind of say, oh, that's a scene that Clay should have watched. But I only say it's like one scene. It's not like you're missing episodes where good stuff is happening. Mm-hmm. So the characters aren't really anything special at this point. I feel like Sisko is head and shoulders above everyone. Odo and Quark are pretty good at this point. And then after that, it's kind of a drop-off. We actually haven't seen Chief O'Brien in a while. He comes back in this episode, but he's still there.
God.
Yeah, he's a presence that is very much missed.
Once again, I would watch an entire season of Chief O'Brien's substitute teacher.
Hanging with Mr. O'Brien. I think that the show itself, this episode is better than the last one we watched just because it's doing all the Deep Space Nine stuff. It's not a good episode to me, but it's doing the stuff that makes the show different than what TNG would have been. Where, how are you saying that the Jake and Nog stuff, in TNG, the Jake and Nog stuff would have been, Jake would have been a character we've never met before, and he's having a trouble with another kid on the Enterprise, and that's the only episode that you ever see those characters in. Right. The Nog and Jake thing is going to be a storyline that goes for many seasons in this series. So
that's interesting.
So
I was just going to say, I was going to ask, is the Sisko and his son stuff, do you feel like that's them trying to redo what they attempted to do with Crusher and Wesley?
Yes.
And do you think they are doing it better?
They're doing it much, much better. I used to not really like their relationship, but I'm a little bit older now. It used to kind of just annoy me that they were having that kind of stuff in the show when I was younger, and I didn't really care about the relationship between the father and son, stuff like that. But now that I'm a little bit older, I do think they do it really well. Like I think that Avery Brooks and Sirach Lofton, I think his name are, play a pretty good father-son pair here. And the best scene in this one to me is the very end when he says, "You're a good boy, Jake," or whatever, and he says, "Go hang out with your friend," and then that's the ending credits roll.
And then they both check out the sweet ass on that Vulcan that walks by.
The Vulcan is the wrong race to hit on, though, right? Like
I was going to say, are the Vulcans the sexiest race? Is that what they are? Like, is that the seed that they're planting?
Well, it's because they're not even trying, right? That's what makes them so goddamn desirable. Is that they don't?
Yeah, it's
they don't
like
even
that
care.
One Direction song. They don't even know that they're beautiful.
Yeah, I think that I think it's stuff like that. Do you find this has probably been the episode it's had the most prominence in. Do you find the Sisko and Jake stuff relatable? Do you think it's a reboot of Crusher and Wesley?
It felt like I couldn't help but feel like they were trying to I don't know if they were trying to consciously redo that, but it seems like it was the same kind of dynamic, but they have the benefit of being able to push it towards the front a little bit more.
Sure.
Because I mean, it's an interesting dynamic, but when it's dealing with a third tier character like it was on TNG, you don't really have a lot of screen time for it. You can't really do much with it.
Jake also doesn't have the obnoxious Mary Sue personality where he's going to save the day in every episode.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, so far I think it's been pretty good. Like if you cut out all the garbage in the last episode, I mean, the little bit that they give you with the father and son is pretty good. Yeah, Sisko is an interesting father. His parenting techniques are interesting because they are. I still can't get a read on him to a certain extent because like. Sometimes I feel like he's a little bit looser than, say, a Picard character, but on other times he feels like he's even harder than Picard.
Yeah.
So his fathering technique is very. It kind of goes back and forth between, hey, how about you just let's go play some baseball and like be here at 5:00 so we can talk about vaginas.
You're right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that Sisko as a character is kind of, he can be much more sort of militaristically and chew your head off type of an officer, but he's also much more friendly and engaging than Picard was at the same time. He's kind of the two extremes in the same person. And I feel he's the same way with Jake. He's obviously very strict with Jake, but at the same time he's very accommodating of him and what he wants to do and like where they want to go and like how much time they want to spend with each other, and eventually he lets him hang out with Nog and everything like that. So it's not he's not a completely rules with an iron fist father, but at the same time he still is constantly keeping an eye on Jake, right? That's the kind of the point of this story. He's always going to be watchful over him. I think that my big takeaway from this episode is that there's the two plots. There's the Jake and Nog plot, and then there's the Ferengi government plot. Both of them are okay. I'll say they're okay on their own. Both of them have kind of problems with them that knock them down from being great. I think the Jake and Nog stuff is a little bit undone by the fact that the kid actors are still young and they haven't settled in to things yet. They don't have a lot of time.
I thought Nog was pretty good.
Nog's pretty good, I think. Yeah.
I was wondering if he was older than he's supposed to be playing because I feel like he was kind of he was better at playing a Ferengi than Worf's kid ever was at playing.
Playing right? Yeah. Let me see here. Is that Aaron Eisenberg? He must be. I think that he is Nog. So he's 48 at this time. So he would have been 20. He would have been older than, so he's an older actor. Yeah. I think that those guys work well together. I think that the acting could be a little bit better. Jake Sisko will get a little bit older, a little bit better as the season wears on and everything, or the series wears on. The Ferengi stuff is the meat of this episode. And I think that the Ferengi stuff, while simultaneously trying to deepen our understanding of Ferengi culture, only makes things a little bit more confusing to me about how the Ferengi operate. I'll lead that off by saying, do you think that the move to turn the Ferengi into sort of a mob light is a good idea? Or was that always your understanding of the Ferengi, that they were always kind of just a non-violent version of the mob?
No, I guess I never really thought about it like that. I don't know if I like it. Because it seems it makes their it seems to make their nature more of a thought out
Oh, like they're they're actively creating this sort of persona
as
for
opposed
themselves.
to just being like I always understood the Ferengi, their greediness or whatever, just being that's just how they are.
Sure.
And not that was like the basis of their society was, greed is good, although I guess, I don't know. I mean, who cares?
I mean, do you think that
it's kind of a toss up because it's like, I don't know if it really adds anything, but if you don't do that, I don't think it really takes anything away. So
yeah. I don't like the mobby aspect of them. I think that I'd rather have I don't know if I'd be, they're always criticized as being capitalist, right? Like that's the criticism of the Ferengi, is that they're like, oh, they're a commentary on capitalist societies. And I don't think they really are. They're kind of this weird, they have sort of a religious inclination towards business in a lot of sense. Like it's not like they're not particularly capitalist because they're not interested in, to get like sort of technical, they're not interested in like controlling production or anything like that. They're really just kind of interested in wheeling and dealing with people.
Yeah.
And in that sense, their mob mentality makes sense to me at the same time because they don't have really any ethics besides this is the wheeling and dealing that we want to do. But at the same time, it doesn't really give their society a lot of structure that I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. And that's why they would actually want to do that. Like at a certain point, they hit a Klingon level, right? Where it's like, well, why aren't they all just killing each other in the name of profit at this point? Well, before you get off your point, this is the introduction of, they mentioned it a couple times, the rules of acquisition, which are going to be the guiding principles of Ferengi society. 2 of them are mentioned in this episode. You have rule of acquisition 1, once you have their money, you never give it back. Rule of acquisition 6 is never allow family to stand in the way of opportunity. But that's going to sort of...
Number 3 is never get high on your own supply.
That's right. There's going to be like 100 and something of these rules that as the series goes along, but those are the 2 of them. Did you disagree or agree with anything I just said about the Ferengi?
Well, no, I don't disagree. I was just thinking about how interesting it is that all of these races that they introduce always end up going back to some sort of weird like pseudo religious base. Like there's something sort of like the Nagus here is sort of like one part Godfather, one part like
Pope.
Pope.
Yeah.
And like every single one of the races that they have seem to do the same thing. The Vulcans, who are all very logical, have a weird religious aspect to them.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
the Klingons, who are all about honor and whatever, and war, have a weird religious aspect to them. That's like the driving force of their culture. It's like it's not just like, oh yeah, no, we're also Baptist. It's like, no, the Baptists are the source of our entire culture.
Yes, right.
And it's very odd given how, quote unquote forward thinking the world is supposed to be here, that all of these they're still treating all of these new races basically as like one step removed from savages. Like the traditional colonialist idea of like what a savage is, basically.
Sure.
It's fairly interesting.
And I think that to take it from a Deep Space Nine angle, it's actually interesting in this to me that Sisko and Jake are having a conversation about Ferengi and human relationships, right? And Sisko says that humans and Ferengi don't really get along because we don't have a lot in common, basically. Like that's this kind of thing, which I don't know if you disagree. To me, that's a new sort of perspective in Star Trek. TNG would never have said that, I don't think. The fact that Sisko seems to be saying, he's kind of proven wrong ultimately, that there are we will just never be able to sort of reach a common ground with the Ferengi. They're too different from us, which is not really true, because I do feel that there's a lot of human society that would like what the Ferengi are all about. There's a certain kind of like business style and things like that would be very interested in what the Ferengi are doing. But the bigger part of their culture that we've kind of learned about now is that they're highly misogynistic. They don't like females doing anything, and they're unbound by ethics outside of their sort of code of making money, down to the thing of they don't want to be sending their kids to school to learn things, because then they'll learn ethics. And does the fact that the Ferengi don't send their kids to school, does that make sense to you? Is that a good business decision at this point?
No.
Yeah.
I don't think so at all.
I mean, what it's all coming down to is that for me, the Ferengi just feel like a kind of hodgepodge of different cliched stuff that's coming together, and it's not really making a lot of sense to me at this point.
And I mean, I think that goes a little bit in line with the religious backstory, or the religious subtext, not subtext, but like what I was talking about before, because it's that stuff seems really easy to fall back on. That sort of backstory for a civilization is very simplistic.
Yeah.
And it seems like you're saying, they end up becoming a lot of cliches and a lot of not really well defined. Because if I was a Ferengi, I would absolutely send my kid to human school, because if you learn the way that the humans think, you have a better chance of
screwing them over.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That would be my point with it. It feels like they're just limiting themselves in a way that doesn't really make sense. And if their ultimate drive is to get this kind of like quote unquote profit thing going, they have a lot of rules in place that prevent them from getting that done in a lot of ways.
And also, it would be an interesting character change if Quark's brother there, the one that looks like David Duchovny.
Yeah.
If he was like, you know what, I want you to go to school. I want you to learn ethics, because I don't want you to be like. It would be interesting to have a different character in that world, from that race. I mean, it's like not every Ferengi. I mean, obviously, it's part of their thing is that they're greedy or whatever, but it doesn't mean everyone has to be exactly the same.
Right. Yeah. The monoculture.
Why can't you send your kid to school to learn about different cultures? Having a world where the human idea is that everybody is kind of cool with each other, and we're all kind of learning from everybody else. We want to learn from all these other new societies, but then having every society they meet be very closed off and not like that in any way.
Right. Even
like single characters, single people from those societies is very strange. I mean, maybe it's easier from a storytelling standpoint to deal with, but I feel like a Ferengi who is kind of not necessarily rejecting his culture, but encouraging his son to learn about it and maybe take a different tack would be interesting. I mean, obviously we're kind of going off of what this episode's about now, but it's just it would be an interesting direction to go.
Well, you should write for the show. I'll leave it at that. But we do come back. All these characters are going to come back. Nog, Rom, Quark, everyone is going to be here for a very long time. So they do start to flesh out the Ferengi going forward a little bit better than this. I think that the problem here is that the Ferengi, I'm fine with the plot mechanics of this episode. I think it's fine. It's Wallace Shawn from Princess Bride playing the Nagus, which makes me laugh. I think that the plot mechanics are fine. It's a fine little mystery. Everything ties out together. I just don't feel that the Ferengi here, it feels like they're trying to flesh them out at the expense of having a really sort of captivating story going on behind what they're talking about. Because a lot of it's just Quark gets held to the Nagus. He's scared he's going to get killed. He gets betrayed by his brother. That's the end of it. It's not a particularly captivating story outside of what they're trying to do to show us how Ferengi society works and the ins and outs of it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we have more mentions of the holosuites here. The Nagus apparently loves his holosuites. Quark apparently has the best holosuites because everyone comes to travel to Quark's to try him out. He'd hate to be a janitor at Quark's, I think, is the sort of the long and short of it. I don't know. You sounded a little bit more. I don't know. Would you say that you liked this episode, or would you say that you just thought it was just kind of a different change of pace from what you'd seen before?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say I liked it, but I think it's a step in the right direction. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Did
I would never go back and watch this episode again.
No, right. Yeah, I think that even just to revisit Mr. O'Brien, I guess we should talk about O'Brien here. He wasn't in the episode for a long time because he went to Earth to visit his in-laws because it was his mother-in-law's 100th birthday. That's fine. You can take some PTO for that. he comes back and his wife has him assume her job until she returns. I don't know. I think Miles O'Brien is biting off a little bit more than he can chew at this point. I don't think he needs to be teaching the kids in addition to fixing the station and all that stuff.
I think he should be in every scene of every episode
with his sleeves rolled up, ready to do. Because
yes.
he doesn't have anything. He doesn't do anything else in this episode, right? Besides, I think just the kids. That's it. He's only in the.
No, yeah, he's only there really to tell Sisko that his
right.
son's acting up with Nog there.
Yeah, yeah. And Sisko fires back with, "Well, you've only got a 3-year-old for a daughter, so what the hell do you know?"
Yeah, eat it, Miles.
Eat it, Miles. But you think that this episode brought some characterization that you were missing between Jake and Nog, and you thought that did you learn anything about Quark, or is this just kind of an episode that happens to Quark?
Yeah, he just sort of happens to him.
Yeah,
he doesn't act in any way that I would expect him not to act.
Yep. We met Rom. I think this is first. Rom is his brother. That's the first time you met him.
Oh, right.
I mean, it ties into the thing of like, why aren't all the Ferengi just cheating on each other all the time? And it's this weird thing I have with the Ferengi plot line where while it's happening, I'm questioning why this happens this way. And then when it wraps up, I'm like, well, there could have been no other way to wrap this up, kind of a thing. So I feel relieved when it wraps up. At the same time, I'm a little bit torn about it as we're going through it. I think that... Oh, there's an homage shot to The Godfather in this. I didn't get that. I don't know if it was shot well enough or if I'm familiar enough with The Godfather to actually make my way through it.
I wonder if... I think the more Ferengi that are around on Deep Space Nine, the less interesting they become.
Okay.
Because the reason that I find them interesting is because they are sort of like the chaotic factor.
Yep.
Entered into... they're the chaos that Sisko is trying to control, more or less.
Yep.
Like they are. I shouldn't say they are the chaos, but they are more. It's more likely that they're going to egg on the chaos than they are going to, put the fire out.
Yep.
And so I find that to be interesting, but I don't really find it interesting if it's just a bunch of Ferengis talking to each other.
Yeah.
Because what point do they serve as a, it's because it ends up you end up going in like a, an Ouroboros of people yelling and cheating on each other and then trying to fuck everybody, and it doesn't serve anything else other than just to be like, hey, isn't it crazy if we got a bunch of these guys together?
Right. They're all short. It's hilarious. Look at them.
Yeah.
I think I'd agree with that. I think that they do, and that probably ties into my thing about like their society doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like how the Ferengi Alliance actually manages to hold itself together doesn't make a lot of sense when you show them all together, but if you just sort of have them spread across the galaxy and they all just kind of do their own thing, which to me would make thematic sense with them, right? Because they should sort of be competing with each other all the time. Their sort of cooperation doesn't make a lot of sense, but if they have their own little bar and they have their own thing going on and they have their own scams running in the background, I think it works better for all the characters and you don't run into those kind of problems.
And like what? So if the nature of this people is that they are, cheaters and swindlers, what is the Ferengi homeworld like? Is it just like the floor of the stock market where everybody's yelling?
Yep.
It's one of those things where it's when you make that character aspect at the forefront of the character, it's like this is what their society is about. It's very hard to picture what that would be like and have it be in any way effective or structural.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that I'm trying to think about why the ships of them don't bother me, right? And it's because I can kind of see a ship of Ferengi running itself like a business, which is what Quark and his family have here. They have the business where Quark's in charge. And for some reason, I have trouble translating that kind of thing to a society of them, where it makes sense that like a single ship could be considered a business and there's the CEO who tells everyone else what to do and they all work for him. As a society, it doesn't seem that way. And the Nagus doesn't come across like a boss, right? He comes across like a prophet who will screw you over if he wants to. And you have to respect, because of his position, you have to sort of allow him to buy you out or something. And that just doesn't ring true to me. I would have preferred the Nagus to be. Would it have been too cheesy to you if he came in and he was like a highly efficient businessman? Would that have been okay if he was concerned about, like, if he was constantly wanting to talk about like the them being in the red and stuff like that? Do you think that's too cheesy, or is that a better way to take the Ferengi?
I don't know. I think it would. I think I would have liked it. I mean, maybe I would have liked it if they went the other way and had the Nagus just turn out to be like that entire position was a scam on his part.
Okay.
Right, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's the ultimate pyramid scheme where he becomes the leader of the people.
Right.
It's only there so he can get to the point where he can take a vacation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would actually work. Yeah. I think I don't really have a lot to talk about. I mean, this episode is basically just about the Ferengi and fleshing them out. I don't think the plot is particularly interesting, but the Jake and Sisko stuff is fine, and everything here is just about moving forward. So we'll go to final thoughts. We'll wrap this one up. We'll read some Patron thoughts, and then we will close it out.
Jake.
Dad! What are you doing here?
I was waiting for you.
Dad.
You're a great boy. You know that? Now go be with your friend.
All right. Closing thoughts for the Nagus. We'll get to patron thoughts, and then we'll move into me and Clay's final thoughts here. Mecha Jeff writes, The Nagus. I think this episode laid a lot of groundwork for how the series would present the Ferengi. I enjoyed it as a nice, lighthearted episode. We're going to have some conflict about whether or not this is lighthearted. Do you consider this episode to be lighthearted, Clay? Or is this a darker episode?
I think the tone is kind of light, but the actual stuff that's going on is fairly dark.
Right, yeah. Stephen Cobb writes, The Nagus. Some dark stuff going on in this one. The cycle of abuse from Quark haranguing Rom, then Rom in turn yelling at Nog. Then the Nagus comes in and bullies Quark. Kind of a dark example of Ferengi society. In later seasons, they are much lighter, save for the misogyny, but I could not help thinking while watching this episode, wow, that's a great way to mess up your kids. Yeah, we touched on all that.
I did like where he makes the Ferengi equivalent of asking his brother. He's telling his brother he thought he had bigger balls, but he says bigger lobes. Implying that the size of one's ear canal there seems to be the stature of manliness.
I think that's actually in canon, is that they love the bigger the ears, the better the Ferengi is, the way that they see it. Nick Sturgey says, I might be in the minority, but I love the early Deep Space Nine episodes. They define the look and mood of the series, and the small stories set up the characters well. They're building for stories down the line, but pacing themselves pretty well. My favorite here is the Nagus. I love how the lighting, like the scenes before the Ferengi council meeting, is heavy on shadows despite how absurd and comical the episode is. Still hiding in your father's shadow? My father casts a very long shadow. Be careful you don't disappear in it. How that scene is shot adds to the humor, and Quark's reaction when Rom offers him to run the bar is perfect. He did pull out what I thought was the best quote of the episode, that's still hiding in your father's shadow, and he casts a very long shadow, and be careful you don't disappear in it. That's a very mobby line, though. Which maybe doesn't sit particularly well with me.
I have a question though. Do you so I can appreciate the thought that, it looks like they're taking their time developing these characters and stuff. Do you think that they're doing that on purpose? Do you think that, like, in the writer's room at this point, they're thinking, all right, if we can just put the work in right now, by the time we get to season 3, this will all pay off? No,
they're absolutely not doing that.
Yeah, I appreciate the hindsight of that seeming what it looks like.
Yeah,
but I don't think that's what's happening.
No, that's the series is not as much of a pre-planned out thing as much of they do a very good job retconning stuff later on, and they build off of what are early mistakes, in my opinion, and they fix them later on.
That's good. Yeah.
So everything here, as you've been hearing, everything here sort of comes back in a lot of ways. They just get better at bringing it back and making it appealing to watch and appealing to sort of think about. Eric McGowan writes, The Nagus. While silly, the episode is surprisingly entertaining and does a good job with fleshing out the Ferengi characters and giving us more information about the culture as a whole. The friendship between Jake and Nog is the particular highlights. I do like the friendship between Jake and Nog. I think it does work. You don't get a lot out of them in this one, but I think that the bones are there. And
yeah, it's going to take... I thought it was pretty good here. It's going to take me a little bit to get used to because generally I don't really like I like the concept of kids on the starships and kids on the, but so far they have not impressed me. Not in this show specifically, but just like in TNG or whatever, they have not impressed me with the way that they handle children on the Enterprise or children in Starfleet. But they seem to be doing interesting stuff here, so I'm willing to give it a chance.
They don't do a good job of really describing what they do during the day. They obviously go to school, but I don't know what the kids really get up to. They seem to have a lot of free time to just get into trouble. But it's not like there's an episode that's focused on what they are doing in their free time. Last comment, Cal Barrett writes, I like the Nagus a lot. Not only does Deep Space Nine seem to be moving away from TNG's style of storytelling, but it's also fixing some of TNG's mistakes. The Ferengi are finally giving an interesting culture and hierarchy, and the episode balances humor with some dark moments and themes. The makeup is superb, which is a rare feat for Star Trek, and the episode is one of the season's best. Sin-illiterate and fun, even if it has few lasting consequences for the series going forward. Certainly in terms of the Nagus, it doesn't really have a lot going forward for it. I'd agree with that. I think the Ferengi makeup is holding up pretty well. I don't know if I like the episode a lot. I think it's kind of tough, but we'll get into that. So Clay, we'll give our final thoughts and ratings about this one. What would you give this guy on a scale of 1 to 5?
Well, based off of my previous ratings, I would have to give this one a 3.
Okay.
Because
you're talking about all the episodes you've seen so far.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I don't remember what I gave the first couple, but I don't know, maybe that's being too generous because it's not as bad as what's it called? Shit or Get Off the Pot?
Move Along Home.
Move Along Home. It's not as bad as Move Along Home. But it's better, I think, than the Q episode, if only better structurally.
Yep.
If not, as far as interesting wise goes. But I think they can do better.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna give it a low 3.
Yeah. I would have liked you to have said that, like, if you were some executive at Paramount and you came into the writer's room, it's like, I think you can do better. I'm going to give it a 2 because I think like you're saying, the structure here is fine. This is just not you might have even heard it in the sort of the commentary we've been doing on the podcast. It's not a particularly exciting episode. Nothing really grabs your attention about it. It's really just, it's structurally sound, but not very interesting. It's like the most boring ranch house in a suburb cul-de-sac or something. It's like, this is fine, but it's not really going to pull. Yeah. It's not really going to get my heart going or anything.
Well, I've noticed that seems to be a problem so far is, at least from the episodes I've watched, there seems to be a problem in generating excitement in the setting that they have.
Yep.
Because it's either something like the last episode where it's completely fucking stupid and ridiculous and has no weight to it, or like which is very similar to the Q episode where it's like, it's just sort of happening because Q's here and there might be a weird bomb happening, but like feels very manufactured.
Yeah.
Or it's like, well, we have to fire up the thrusters on the entire space station and drive ourselves into a wormhole. It's like there's no, like they haven't figured out the middle ground yet.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if that's the same in the episodes I haven't watched, but it seems like they haven't quite figured out how to make a really compelling action. I don't mean that like in the spectacle sense, but just like action and drama take place on the space station.
No, it's something I hadn't thought about, but I think you're right, and I think it applies to all the episodes, even the ones that you haven't seen. They're having a very hard time. Do you think it's the nature of the station not moving, or do you like? I'm trying to think. Like early TNG, the episodes were bad, but I at least there was a like defining thing that was happening that you're like, okay, this is stupid, but there is like a thing happening here. Be it Wesley, crushing some flowers and getting the death sentence or something like that. Here, I feel that they're really trying to push the characters more than the plot at this point. And the plots feel to me all like we've mentioned it. They feel like warmed over TNG episode plots that they're just kind of throwing in here to see what these new characters would do with it. And do you think it's the station just not moving? Do you really think that's a big part of it? I wouldn't disagree. I'm just curious.
I think to an extent a little bit. Not that it's not moving, but it's like I feel like the pitch for this show probably involves something to the extent of like and it'll be really interesting to see how the crew deals with all these new races that cross through the paths of this sort of melting pot of races on the station. It's like, all right, that's fine, but you're not making me care about any of these people yet.
Yeah.
Like it's the kind of thing where like I think they're doing it backwards. I think they, much like they kind of do in the first season of TNG, even though it didn't really work there, I feel like it would work better here, maybe. I feel like they should be leaning a little bit more on plot, but what you should be getting from the plot is insight on how these characters act and how these characters react, as opposed to just they're jumping into character stuff. I feel like, and haven't really earned it yet.
Yeah,
it's not quite, at least for me anyway. I don't know what these characters are about enough to really care when you have like a character heavy episode.
So one of my favorite episodes so far outside of the pilot is an episode called The Passenger, which came out before this. It has a terrible plot in it, right? Like the plot is just a complete joke by the time that it wraps up. The last 20 minutes are absurd. However, it's one of the few episodes so far that's dealt with the characters are chafing under having to work together with like the Bajoran and how Starfleet interact with each other. It's the episode where the lieutenant security guard is introduced. He comes in and he's very Starfleet minded about how he handles stuff, and Odo has his own way that he runs security on the station. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the subplots work with the way that Sisko has to kind of stroke Odo's ego and manipulate Odo to work with Starfleet and also have Odo work on Sisko's side and everything. I feel like the series, for all this backstory of like layer of the wormhole and Bajor and everything that's going on, and like it's a mix of Starfleet and Bajoran people on this station, none of the episodes really seem to care about examining any of that stuff. They're all doing these weird sci-fi plots that are existing outside of it, and the best moments so far are coming from those character moments. Yeah.
Like in the last episode, which was, pretty much hot garbage.
Yes, absolutely.
The best part was that scene, was that line that Sisko drops about, it's a good thing you're not in charge then. I was like, okay, that tells me a lot about him. I mean, maybe it feels like it's maybe it might be a bit of a cliched line or whatever, but I feel like I learned more about him in that one line.
And Dax, the way that too. Dax would have left him behind, yeah. Yeah,
the way that they are reacting in that situation than I have in any of these long-winded, like, talking scenes.
Right. Sure. Yeah, right. Yeah, I'd agree. I think that's the problem with the series so far, is basically that kind of a point, that they're doing the wrong stories in a lot of ways. I'm going to give it a 2 because I think that the structure's fine, but it's not particularly exciting. You could have fixed this. It's just not there yet. It's a 2 out of 5 for me. Guys, if you enjoyed the content, you can check out all the social media links in the podcast description, the video description. You can go to patreon.com/the File, a couple $1 a month to get extra content, and you can leave feedback for the show. Like we just read from some of the patrons, you can leave your thoughts about the episodes and they'll get read on the podcast. Outside of that, I have a question. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question moving forward. There's a great episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the name of which I can't remember. It's a fairly well-known name. I can't remember what it is, but it's the entire episode follows the character of Xander, who's he's like the only person in the group who doesn't have any powers, and it's kind of him going about his day while in the background everybody else is dealing with this like world-ending apocalyptic monster, but you're only seeing his side of it.
Yep.
And I was thinking, like, do they do an episode, anything like that on this show? I feel like this would be ripe for that, where it's like Jake and Nog having some, small adventure while Q is like fucking with everybody else on the ship to the point where it's like gonna collapse or something like that. Do they do anything like that? I feel like this setting is ripe for a story like that.
I'm trying to think if they do something like that. I don't know if they do something as obvious as that. They do have... there are going to be smaller stories told from their perspectives, but I don't think there's the one that you ever see like a cataclysmic event going on in the background while you're seeing those characters. But they will settle into smaller stakes. I feel that could have been a TNG thing as well. They kind of did it with Lower Decks in the 7th season, where you're with the 4 new characters that you never met as the episode is going on in the background, and you as a lower ranking officer aren't aware of what's going on in the background. But no, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. People let me know if there is an episode that you can just put the title and we can be alerted to it. But other than that, Clay, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to, frankly, to these getting a little better. So.
Yeah. We got a long road to hoe. I think the next one you're on for is the last episode of the season, and it's called Duet, and it's what I think people have been tweeting at you that you should be waiting for Duet. I don't want to oversell it, but it's an episode that moves the show in the right direction. They pick a storyline that makes sense and it actually works.
I can't wait to disappoint everybody.
I know. I just feel like this is point of view. It was the worst thing I've ever seen. Outside of that, I think that's it. Guys, thank you very much for listening and supporting the show. We'll be back with Vortex after this, Vortex is the one where Odo... That's right. Odo meets someone who claims to have knowledge about his past. So we'll get to that when we get to it. But thank you very much for supporting the show. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.